So what in the world am I doing sitting here talking to you about anything to do with faith? Well, here's the deal. I'm supposed to talk. And in theory, you're supposed to listen. But if you want to close your eyes and catnap every once in a while, it's okay. If you've been in church a long time, you've heard everything I'm going to say 10 times over. But if you want to stay awake and listen, then that would be wonderful. With that in mind, I have another question for you. Have you ever asked yourself what God wants from you and whether you're doing it? If you've never asked that, then you are indeed blessed to have this clear path in front of you in all circumstances. But if you have asked yourself that, then you're in good company because all the rest of us have. The Old Testament prophet Micah in chapter 6, verse 8 asked, "What does the Lord require of you?" And then he answers, "But to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." Three things. Three things that would please God. Not 300, not even a dozen. Three. Surely we can do that. I don't always do those things, and I don't do any of them perfectly. Sometimes I don't even know what they mean. In certain circumstances, what would justice look like? In certain circumstances, what is mercy? And walking humbly with God, that presents a whole new set of problems. Let me give you an example about humility. When does acknowledging your God-given abilities cross the line into pride and arrogance? Let's say you're prepped for surgery. You're waiting for your surgeon to come in. This is the man or woman that is quite literally going to hold your life in their hands. Do you want that surgeon to come in and say, "I'm pretty sure I could do this"? How many of you want that one? No takers? How about the surgeon who comes in and says, "I know I can do this"? That's my guy right there. Yeah, I agree with you. So there is some decision making required of us with all three of these things. We just don't always know what they mean. Don't doze off right now, because this is important. Okay? The disciples didn't know that stuff either. Can you imagine the men who were closest to Jesus during his earthly ministry had questions just like we do? Sometimes they would ask, and sometimes Jesus would just go ahead and tell them stuff, because he knew they didn't know. The same way he knows we don't know. Let's do some exploring. See if we can find some answers to our questions. The first item on Micah's list of what God requires of us is justice. When we hear that word, a natural tendency might be to think of law written in big letters. We might think of flashing blue lights or courtrooms or judges who look very stern. We talk about social justice. We have volumes of laws about that, but we're still baffled about how to achieve it. I'm not a big picture kind of person. I cannot comprehend the size of the earth or the number of people who inhabit it. Nor can I think in big enough terms to deal with justice for all those people. The small picture deals with the people right around us, the ones we're closest to. This is justice on a one-to-one scale. And if we can't solve that problem, how are we going to solve something as massive as the large scale? What does justice look like for us in carrying out our everyday life in relation to other individuals? Jesus gave us the answer in Matthew 7:12. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. The golden rule. We grew up with that. We memorized that. But we stopped memorizing it before we read the next part of that statement, and I'm going to read it to you now. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Did you ever think about the golden rule for fulfilling the very basis of the law? And it's person to person. We like the golden rule, don't we? I do, because I know what I want. I want to do whatever I like, and I don't want you to hold me accountable. I figure you want the same, so there we have it. We both get to do whatever we want, then there are no consequences. I can see you don't believe that's the way to read that. Well, of course it's not. It's upside down. But we do that, don't we? We can take the simplest statement and twist it around until it says what we want to hear, or until it omits anything we don't want to hear. In circles, they call that spin. And we're so clever, we think we invented it. We didn't. It's very old. It's as old as original sin. If you go to chapter 3 of Genesis and read the account of the serpent and Eve and Adam, you'll find so much spin your head will swim. That's more homework for you. I'm not going to read it to you this morning. Is it any wonder we can distort the golden rule to fit our purposes? If we can take this simple statement and twist it around, is there some statement that would explain it that we would have trouble distorting? Jesus gave the meaning of the golden rule to his disciples on the eve of his crucifixion. In John 13:34, he said, I give you a new commandment. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, so you should love one another. How did Jesus love his disciples? Among the ways are he took care of them, he shared his wisdom with them, he treated them like brothers, he held them accountable when they needed it, he encouraged them when they needed it. In short, he loved them unconditionally. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, not to our detriment and not to their detriment, but because we love one another. That's the simple message of how we do justice. The second part of Micah's answer concerns mercy. Did you notice that Micah says we are to love mercy? We are not to express it because we feel it is expected of us or because we have to, and not grudgingly, but without reservation. We are to love showing mercy. And we know what mercy looks like. Those of you who take food and socks to the homeless are examples of mercy. Those of you who participate with the St. Man ministry are examples of mercy. Those of you who work the annual rummage sale to raise money for charitable causes are examples of mercy. Someone who arrives here early and unlocks the doors so a charitable group can meet on the premises or so we can come in to worship is an example of mercy. There are examples of mercy throughout this congregation that most of us don't even know about. But every form of mercy has a foundation. The psalmist expressed this foundation in chapter 51, verse 1. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions. The very foundation of mercy rests in forgiveness. In order to have mercy, to love mercy, one thing is required, that we set aside self-interest. We do not do mercy from a position of superiority. If we want to help the poor, we don't hold their poverty against them. If we want to help the injured, we don't hold their injury against them. If we want to help the lost, we don't hold their lostness against them. Still, in our humanity, we have questions about the limits of forgiveness. Just how far are we supposed to go? Peter wondered about that as well. And in Matthew 18:21-22, he asked Jesus, "Lord, how often shall my brother act amiss toward me and I forgive him?" You can substitute any word you want for brother. It might be sister, parent, child, friend, neighbor, whatever you need. "Lord, how often shall my brother act amiss toward me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? You sinned against me, I forgive you. 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 I forgive you." That's a lot of forgiveness. Let's try to figure out where Peter's coming from when he asked that question. He knew he's supposed to forgive. He's taken in that much from his time with Jesus. He could have been thinking, once is good, but maybe I should forgive 2 or 3 times. Then he decided to really notch it up. He said 7 times. A lot of forgiveness there. 7 is a sacred number in his culture. On the 7th day, God rested after creating the world, the Sabbath. Very sacred number. Peter was probably pretty confident he wouldn't have to forgive 7 times. And what did Jesus say? I do not say up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Let's be clear on this. Jesus was not saying forgive him 490 times and then you're off the hook. No, he was not giving a literal number. He was using a multiple of the sacred number to say unlimited times, as many times as it takes. Before moving on to the third item, I need to remind you of something here that Pastor Jeff has said many times. The man, woman, or child who's in an abusive relationship should seek help to get to a safe place. I'm sure we'll hear Pastor Jeff say that again because he's passionate about safety. When someone is in an abusive relationship, their justice has been violated. When they are dealing with abuse, they are a long way from being able to deal with mercy and forgiveness. The third item on Micah's list is to walk humbly with our God. There are a number of Bible passages talking about humility and what it is not and what it is. I want to read you one of my favorite stories about what humility is. It's found in Luke 8:43-48. Jesus is in a crowd of people, and we're told that the crowd pressed him closely. Let's pick up at verse 43. "And a woman who had suffered from hemorrhages for years and had spent on doctors all that she had, whom no one had been able to cure, came up behind him and touched the hem of his robe. Immediately her hemorrhage stopped." Let's take a minute and talk about this woman. In those days, they did not have our present-day knowledge or advantages. They did not have Dr. Roy Upton and his years of expertise and experience. In this woman's day, if they did not understand a medical condition, they were very cautious about it, probably rightfully so, for all they knew it could be contagious. Because of her condition, this woman was not welcome in polite society. She could never hope to have anything like a normal life. This woman had spent all she had on doctors. She had done everything everybody told her to do. And she had come to the realization that she could do nothing to effect a cure. But she believed the stories she had heard about Jesus, believed them so deeply that she knew if she could just touch the hem of his garment, she would be cured. She did not want to call attention to herself. She had no hope of actually speaking to Jesus. She just wanted to touch the hem of his garment. So she pushed her way through the crowd, no doubt was jostled and shoved, and somehow made her way right up behind Jesus. And she put out her hand and she touched the hem of his garment. And as she had believed, she was cured. Back to the story. Jesus said, "Who touched me?" Uh-oh. She's in trouble now. She's been caught. Maybe she could just the crowd. Let's see what happened. Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When everyone denied it, Peter remarked, "Master, the crowds are all around and pressing you." But Jesus said, "Someone has touched me, for I am conscious of power having gone out of me." When the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling and fell before him and confessed in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been instantly cured. Can you imagine how scared she was? The text said she fell before him trembling. And what did Jesus say to her? "Daughter, cheer up. Your faith has healed you. Go in peace." Isn't that a beautiful story? That's what walking humbly with our God means, knowing we can't do it on our own and going to Jesus Christ, the source of our salvation. I've said a lot of words today. In closing, let's read the passage from Micah again and summarize those 3 parts. "And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God?" Love others. That's the fulfillment of the law. That's justice. Forgive as many times as it takes. That's mercy. Walk humbly with God. Humility is a tough one. You know, ignoring that can just sneak up on us. It does me. When I'm faced with a new challenge in life, my first thought is, how am I going to solve this? How am I going to solve this? Do you do that too? Admit it. Well, cut it out. We've all got to cut it out. We are not up to taking God's job away from him. Like the woman with the hemorrhage, we have to keep realizing on a daily basis that only Jesus can do what Jesus can do. Understanding that is the beginning of humility. Justice, mercy, humility. 3 things that are pleasing to God. Are we going to do them perfectly all the time? Not a chance. If we could, we wouldn't need a Savior. When we sincerely try to please God, just because we want to please him, whether it's 3 things, 300, or 1 thing, and when we fail, God's grace will always be there. What happens when we succeed in doing something pleasing to God? I think like an earthly parent because that's the only way I can think. You may not be a parent, but there's probably a child in your life that's important excuse me, to you. You know how it is when your child does a good thing? This delighted laughter wells up in you and you say, "Good job, I'm proud of you." I like to imagine heaven filled with God's delighted laughter as he says to you, "You did good." This week, I want you to listen for that laughter when you do something that pleases God. And you will. Every one of you will. I want you to hear in your heart God's affirmation that you are His child, and He is so proud of you. And all God's children said, Amen. Ordinarily, I would close the sermon with a spoken prayer, but at this 11 o'clock service, we're going to have a prayer offered in musical form. Before that, though, I want to remind you that the altar is always open, and if you want someone to pray with you, I'm going to be on the front row. There's Lou, Jeremy, Jim. I would feel confident in saying that anybody you might want to pray with you would be willing to do so. Let's be in an attitude of prayer.